Welcome to Going Underground with me, Afshin Ratansi. 3 times a week, we're bringing you the stories that really matter in the United Kingdom as we delve past the mainstream headlines. In today's show, as the 11-year anniversary of the Iraq War approaches, international anti-war and human rights advocate Bianca Jagger takes the stage in the fight for justice. Plus, NHS Scotland is sick and suffering, but calls for a review are being dismissed by the country's health secretary. And want to send your kids to the best school? Set up a charity. For these stories and more, let's go underground. Just in January alone, over 1,000 people were killed in Iraq. The last UK troops withdrew in 2011, and their parting gift has been near daily violence for the Iraqi people. Leading human rights advocate Bianca Jagger was a keynote speaker at the 2003 anti-war rally in Hyde Park. And over 10 years later, she's still fighting for global justice. With me is Bianca Jagger, the human rights advocate and founder and chairman of the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation. Welcome, Bianca. Let's begin with this 11-year anniversary. You went to Iraq in January 2003. Tell me about that. How did you already know something was up?
Well, we all knew that there was going to be a war. So I went with a group of scholars from the US, professors, and we were received by the dean of the university and professors, men and women, by the way.
You were already unconvinced by George W. Bush. You wanted to see for yourself.
Well, I wanted to see, and I wanted to know if there were weapons of mass destruction. Was it possible to have an idea? I wanted to know what the people of Iraq thought about the war. Were they for it? And I wouldn't say that I was amazed and surprised, but even those who finally will admit that they were against Saddam Hussein, they all without distinction, they were all against the war. And I tell you, I asked to meet with the Minister of Defense and to meet with the head of Parliament, the President of Parliament in Iraq. And I wanted to meet as well with the scientist. And when I met with the scientist, that was probably one of the most moving moments for me, because, you know, I asked them if they were weapons of mass destruction, and they said to me, you know, we have been given the opportunity to go to Jordan, and if we are prepared to say that they are weapons of mass destruction, and we know that if we go, that means that we will have, you know, this is a passage to safety. But why will we go and lie? He says, you know, and these people told me, crying, there are no weapons of mass destruction. And every single government official, of course, it's very difficult because you didn't trust any of them. But the scientists, when they said to me, you know, they telling us that we can go to Jordan to be debriefed, but why will we go? Because what they want us is to say that they are weapons of mass destruction. And they were not, and we know we're going to get killed.
And many of these people you met, presumably
of course,
dead.
And a lot of the professors and universities, women and men, a lot of them are dead today. And, you know, and I could not find a single person in Iraq who was for the war. And of course, you know that I participated in certainly the largest demonstration ever in this country against the war in Iraq.
Even before that, we knew during the Clinton administration, UNICEF had said 500,000 children died because of the Clinton sanctions, as it were. Why do you think you and other activists failed to convince politicians and people that, certainly people in the British Parliament, that this war was wrong?
Because in a democracy, you listen to the people. But do you think that Tony Blair cared about democracy, or George Bush, and that he cared whether he had the support of the people of this country or the support of the people in America or of the world?
It's not just them, there were all those other politicians backing those leaders.
Well, yes, because they were fooled and they were misled, and the country was misled. And, you know, and these war criminals who should not be walking free today should be held accountable for what they've done to the world, because the war in Iraq was not only a terrible decision for the Iraqis, for the people in the region, but for the people throughout the world. And the way it has changed our world, what we have done, you know, the damage that we have created, the mess and the world disorder that has been created because of the war in Iraq. And what happened today in Iraq, in Afghanistan, throughout the Middle East. I mean, are we better today? Of course not. I mean, and I feel so strongly, and I feel so angry, and I feel so resentful to think about all the hundreds of thousands of people who died in vain because what happened in Iraq.
Well, many of those
Is Iraq
politicians,
better?
well, many of those politicians, particularly on the Labour benches, Ed Miliband and so on, these are the people that voted for the war. Will you ever forgive them?
Well,
the politicians currently in Parliament?
I think I will be careful with Ed. You know, I don't think that Ed was really at the, you know, at the front of this.
His brother more so,
brigade.
maybe, but
Well,
Parliament is full of
it's
people who
different.
did.
I mean, his brother is his brother, and that's why I support Ed rather than his brother, because that was a very serious mistake. And certainly, of course, I don't forgive Tony Blair, and I think that the people in this country don't either, and that, you know, I feel bad that he's not been held accountable.
But so you don't blame the people in Parliament right now. Blair obviously isn't in Parliament. They all, I mean, Syria, there was a vote for a war in Syria quite recently.
Yes, sure, we can blame, but remember the speeches of Tony Blair when he came to tell them that within 15 minutes, you know, our lives could be at stake. You know, he was so forceful, so forthcoming, such a liar, and the way they lie and deceived the people in this country and Parliament the same way than George Bush did.
Tell us a little bit about what you're campaigning about as regards women in Iraq, for instance.
Well, not only women in Iraq, the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation has been campaigning for many years, but particularly in the last year, for ending violence against women and girls and the culture of impunity, and calling on world leaders to include ending violence against women and girls as one of the Millennium Development Goals. It's called the Missing Millennium Development Goal because when world leaders met in the year 2000, they established 8 Millennium Development Goals, but they did not include ending violence against women and girls. And so a few days ago, I participated in the 1 billion rising, and we are calling for justice for women in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in this country, because what people don't seem to know very often is that you had 60,000 rapes last year, 60,000 women who went to denounce that they were raped. We don't know really how many more. 400,000 women were victims of sexual assault, and 1.2 million women were victims of domestic violence. And you know, on the way to school, 60 million girls, young girls, and children were sexually assaulted. I think it has to do with you know, a societal prejudices, and that this is a failure of legal mechanism to hold the perpetrators accountable, and the failure of legal mechanism and of enforce. You know, to be able to enforce this legal mechanism. And so what I am working with my foundation is to see how can we really examine all the legal mechanisms throughout the world and see what can be done. But above all, what we need is to put an end to the culture of impunity, because this cannot go on. We are in the 21st century, and I believe that we women and men, girls and boys, should declare a nonviolent revolution, stand behind, call for justice for women, and put an end to violence against women and girls.
The 1 billion rising event, they say that they talk about explicitly in their campaign about the intersection of capitalism and imperialism with these sorts of issues. How do you see them as being related?
Well, it's all, I will say that yes, it is related, but can we say that in Russia today you don't have violence against women and girls.
There's capitalism in Russia.
You know, well, I mean, there is Russia, but I mean, look at the, you know, I just was in Berlin, and I did a press conference with Pussy Riot, and we talked about, you know, how women are treated in jails, and it's not just is women, it's refugees, is women throughout the world, is in this country, is everywhere. What we have is that we have governments who are not doing everything they can, whether they are capitalist or non-capitalist, or whether we are talking about Latin America, Asia, you know, Europe, the United States. At every level, in every country, and at every social level, we see violence.
What are the pitfalls of human rights campaigns? I'm thinking about the way it's divorced from politics in a way. You say it is divorced in a way from politics.
Well, when I talk about human rights, and then you have mentioned some of my battles against BP, Shell, Vedanta, which is a mining company, Exxon, you know, Chevron Texaco in Ecuador, and all of these companies that commit terrible human rights violation, what I call crimes against present and future generation. And I campaign, and my foundation has is been working on the introduction of a crime called Crimes Against Present and Future Generation, to hold not only companies, but to hold CEOs and the management accountable for grave human rights violation and irreparable and irreversible damage to the environment.
But multinationals like to associate themselves sometimes with human rights, sometimes with celebrities as well.
Not me.
No,
and I want to be very clear.
Not
and
you,
this
but what should
make
people be doing and be concerned about when they are involved in issues like human rights?
Well, I think
a type
that,
of greenwash,
you know,
I suppose.
I mean, I feel, you know, I tell you what, my foundation is a small foundation, and I'm very careful about who we get money from. We get money from artists, and we do an event called Arts for Human Rights. We will have one in October in this country, and in the UK. Because I feel I don't want to have money from BP or from Shell or from Chevron or from Vedanta, from cigarettes or other companies that are doing just greenwash, and then so to look good and to pretend that they are investing in renewable energy, when really, when you look at the investment in renewable energy, is sometimes less than 5%, 3%, 2% to pretend that they do it. No, I don't want to be associated with. I think that we need to engage them. I think we need to have a conversation, a dialogue, but no, they need to be accountable. They need to be held accountable, and I really object to the actions of our government here in the UK and David Cameron, who is promoting fracking. You know, who is obviously promoting fracking, and he had advisors in the government who are involved and who are investing in fracking. Well, you know, it is a conflict of interest.
Bianca Jagger, thank you.
Thank you.
We've seen millions of pounds donated to comic relief go to tobacco, alcohol and arms firms. But what about charities endorsed by Prince Harry and Angelina Jolie that take your donations to pay for privately educating their bosses' children? Introducing the Halo Trust. This mine clearance charity has been doing just that for more than a decade. Its CEO, Guy Willoughby, receives up to £220,000 a year. He uses that money to send his 4 children to boarding schools. Presumably it covers all those cello and hockey lessons. His kids went to Oundle and Queen Margaret's, 2 of the most expensive schools in Britain that charge up to £30,000 a year. Poor Mr. Willoughby even admitted himself that the costs are staggering. No mention of this on their website, but it does mention celebrities like Princess Diana, who once visited a minefield in Angola, being cleared by Halo. Oh, and £4 million of its cash comes from the taxpayer through the Department for International Development. Join us for the second half to find out what really caused all those floods. Plus, don't like drinking antifreeze? You might want to go easy on those vodka tonics. All that and more after a short break. Read all about it, or not. How misleading or ridiculous are our attention-grabbing newspapers getting? We all know that they're suffering, but is there any limit to what they'll do to get readers? Here at Going Underground, we don't think the public should be misinformed. So catch our breaking views on the past week's breaking news.
So why wasn't Thames dredged in case a rare mollusk was disturbed?
You heard it right. The Daily Mail explained that the reason why homes across the southeast have been flooded is all due to something called the depressed river mussel. According to the headline, you'd think that the government cares more about the depression of mollusks than people. Except that a little way into the article, the paper quotes an Environment Agency spokesman saying, if protected species are living in a river and dredging would reduce the risk of flooding, then we would ensure that dredging occurs.
Exclusive. Children need lessons in how to concentrate because of impact of social media.
The Independent newspaper, currently rumoured to be up for sale, has been talking to Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, who recently crossed a picket line to give a talk on socialism. Now, Tristram Hunt's great big idea seems to be that Facebook makes kids concentrate less. Actually, he talked to them about how Michael Gove seems to be embracing eugenics when it comes to Britain's education system.
Unaffordable cities, squatting in Caracas' Tower of Broken Dreams.
The Guardian continues its campaign against anything vaguely socialist in Venezuela by telling us that an empty tower block in the capital, Caracas, is emblematic of the country's broken dreams. From reading the article, as well as the paper's coverage of recent deadly rioting, you would never realize that since the United Socialist Party came to power in 1999, per capita income has risen by nearly 60%, with wealth increasingly distributed more equitably than in the days when Venezuela was run by US-backed politicians.
Exclusive. How inconvenient. Romanian migrants move into public loo and make it their home.
The Express's exclusive this week tries to claw back some dignity on immigration because the paper had previously predicted the entire country would decamp to Britain if the EU had its way. According to the paper, a council cites 15 Romanian squatters who turned a public toilet into their home as evidence of how mass migration is causing a housing crisis. It should be noted that the Romanian ambassador to London said recently that the number of Romanians who have come to Britain since border controls have been relaxed at the beginning of the year stands at 24. The SNP politician in charge of Scotland's health system warned on Wednesday that the country may lose up to £100 million a year as a result of David Cameron's healthcare policies. NHS Scotland is already facing a string of scandals, including revelations that fraud in the NHS has risen by over 40% in the past 5 years. Given that recent figures show you're more likely to die prematurely in parts of Scotland than in Iraq or the occupied Gaza Strip, you would think some sort of inquiry was in order, but the Scottish Cabinet Secretary for Health dismisses any calls for a full-scale review. With me is Alex Neil, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing. Welcome, Alex. Let's begin with the Queen, because you have been reported as saying you want the Queen to remain head of state in an independent Scotland. Why?
It's always been the policy of the SNP since we were formed in 1934 that in an independent Scotland we would keep the Queen because she's a direct descendant of the last Scottish monarch.
Not even a ballot, though? Because the recent...
Well, that's not the SNP policy. I mean, obviously, once Scotland's independent, it'll be entirely up to the Scottish people to make any decision. But as far as we're concerned, this vote this year is about the transfer of political power from Westminster to Holyrood in Edinburgh. It's not about the Queen. It's not about the future of the monarchy. It's about the transfer of all the political power that resides over Scotland still from Westminster to Holyrood.
OK, so you're a Scottish Health Secretary, basically. How would you consider health in Scotland at the moment? What do you think of it?
Well, we have a number of health challenges in Scotland, some of them very similar to what other countries are suffering. For example, one of the big challenges is the ageing of our population. Over the next 20 years, the number of over 75-year-olds in Scotland will increase by 80%. Now, along with that goes all the comorbidities, the long-term conditions associated with an ageing population. So that's one of the big challenges. Another big challenge is, of course, health inequalities in Scotland. And we are determined to reduce inequality in Scotland, but it's against a background of budgets that are severely constrained by Westminster.
You see, lots of people, and certainly your Labour Party counterparts, definitely saying you should call for an inquiry. We're talking about a country where, most famously in recent years, people talked about the fact that life expectancy in Iraq was 67, minutes from Glasgow city centre, 54. No inquiry into these disparities of Scottish health on the world stage?
Well, the difference between us and the Labour Party is they want an inquiry because of no policy. We have a policy, and our policy is to reduce the age gap between those living in the most prosperous parts of Scotland and those living in the poorer parts. Now, if you look at the Glasgow subway, and you took a journey from the West End to the East End, there is up to 20 years of a gap in the lifespan, average lifespan of males living in the more prosperous area compared to those living in the poorer area. We need to close that gap, and that is our policy to do so. That's one of the reasons why we're insisting on a minimum unit pricing for alcohol, because it has a beneficial impact on poorer sections of society. It's one of the reasons why we're campaigning so hard to make Scotland smoking free by 2034. That also helps people who are poorer.
What about Patience First calling on you to start an inquiry because of the gagging of whistleblowers, again NHS Lothian?
Well, first of all, we don't gag whistleblowers. The policy of the National Health Service in Scotland is to encourage whistleblowers to come forward and tell us anything that's going wrong. Indeed, it's the duty of any medic, written into their terms and conditions of employment, that if they see something happening that shouldn't be happening, it is their duty to report that.
What about NHS Scotland being fraudulent? Freedom of Information Act requesting 42% in the past 5 years, £800 million in fraud being talked about in NHS Scotland.
No, there hasn't been £800 million. That was a journalist's estimate. In fact, the actual amount of fraud in the NHS in Scotland is much, much lower than that. But we take a very, very robust approach to fraud, and anyone found being involved in defrauding the health service in Scotland, we will take whatever legal action against them, both in terms of their employment as well as against criminal action. So,
out of all of these different cases, there's no overall inquiry that the SNP wants into healthcare in Scotland?
No, what we don't need is an inquiry. What we have is a plan for 2020, and we have a plan and a vision to take the National Health Service in Scotland by 2020 to make it one of the best in Europe. Already our patient safety programme is recognised worldwide, not by me, but by President Obama's advisor on health, Professor Don Berwick. The Scottish Health Service, he says, is the safest in the world.
I'm not sure President Obama's advisor would be a good person
to
ask, given the chaos in IT in Obamacare.
He was also an advisor to David Cameron. He's a highly respected international expert in patient safety. He's a highly respected expert in patient safety, worldwide renowned, and he says the patient safety programme in Scotland is the safest in the world, and I think that's true.
Why do you think 72% of people have 72% higher mortality in deprived areas of Scotland when it comes to cancer rates?
Well, cancer is one of our top priorities, obviously, and it's to do very often with the lifestyle, the diet, the lack of exercise.
Nothing to do with hospital provision or NHS
No,
Scotland's.
no, the hospital provision in cancer is amongst the best in Europe. We actually have a very,
can't be the
very
best
good
of 72% higher mortality for people in deprived areas.
No, that's the incidence of cancer. One of the reasons why it's so
mortality,
high,
not incidence.
Well, one of the reasons is because in order to deal and get a lower mortality rate in cancer, you need people to come forward much earlier than what they're doing. And one of the problems, particularly amongst the male population, particularly in the west of Scotland, is they are not coming forward when they get the symptoms. So it's their fault,
it's not to do with NHS Scotland?
It's not a case of fault. I'm just saying we need to change their behaviour so that the minute the symptoms of cancer appear, or indeed of any major illness, they need to come forward right away.
Anywhere in the world.
And not wait until it's too late. Lung cancer is a very good example. Lung cancer is one of the major cancers in Scotland. And one of the problems with lung cancer very often is the symptoms. By the time the symptoms exemplify themselves, it's actually too late to save the patient.
Yes, no, these general ideas about healthcare, I think we all understand. They're discussed in parliaments around the world. But we're talking about a country where people die at an earlier age than in Gaza. And with all these other elements to it, whether it be whistleblowers or IT procurement, there shouldn't be an overall inquiry. You've already decided what you're going to do if you become the leaders of an independent Scotland.
You really need to get facts right. The average life expectancy in Scotland is far higher than the
I
average
meant
life
in
expectancy
certain areas,
in Gaza.
of course, of
well,
Scotland.
of course you can pick pockets. Of course you can pick
Not in
postal code
Britain.
areas.
Not in England.
Of course you can. Absolutely in England. If you go to parts of Liverpool, go to parts of Newcastle, go to parts of London, you will find worse problems than you'll find in many parts of Glasgow.
than Gaza.
You have to look at the average, and the average is very good indeed. And the average lifespan in Scotland, both for men and women overall, is rising very substantially indeed.
So there won't be any need for any inquiry into healthcare in Scotland. The SNP already has a plan for how NHS Scotland, or whatever the new body might become in independent Scotland, how they will provide healthcare in the future.
We have a plan for 2020 and beyond covering both
No need for
healthcare.
consultation.
Well, we are consulting all the time in our plans, and obviously, it's part of the overall plan. We then obviously look at how we need to reconfigure services, modernise services. We do that on an ongoing basis. If you look at the overall picture in Scotland, we have one of the best health services, not just in the British Isles, but one of the best health services in
Not
Europe.
when it comes to disparity.
Well, we're absolutely aware of the disparity issue, and it's been a problem that's been with us ever since the health service has actually been with us over the last 65 years, and we are determined to reduce those disparities. We've only been in power for 6 of those 65 years, and in fact we are tackling health inequalities in Scotland in a whole range of ways, but it is a long-term plan because this is not something that can be solved in 5 minutes.
Alex Neil, thank you.
Pleasure.
Enjoying that mozzarella and ham sandwich? Think you're being healthy for swapping Coca-Cola for fruit juice? Well, it looks like we've all been eating and drinking fake food, as tests on hundreds of different food samples have revealed that a third of all products are mislabeled. You would think that after a horse meat scandal, drinks and food brands would at least try to avoid cutting corners by tricking their dear customers. But juices were full of illegal additives. Vodka was laced with an ingredient used in antifreeze, and beef had some chicken in it. Join us next time as we go underground to bring you the latest beneath the mainstream from around the UK. Don't forget, you can drop us a line on Twitter at underground_RT, like our page on Facebook, or email us, goingunderground@rttv.co.uk. See you on Wednesday.